Hello everyone, and welcome to this mini lecture on the Frankfurt School on Popular Culture, Part 1. We're going to take a look at the Frankfurt School, the culture industry, and critical theory, and explain how these things relate to popular culture and their relationship with that, and some of the problems with that. So the Frankfurt School emerged in the 1920s and was essentially popular up until the 1950s. It was a collection of intellectuals who operated obviously out of Frankfurt. I believe it was the yeah, I forget what university. But so they came up with a variety of theories and theoretical approaches, critical theory being one of the most important. And the best way to understand, I think, the Frankfurt School, culture industry, and critical theory within popular culture is the Henry Ford quote, "Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it is black." And I think in some ways, this embodies their critique of popular culture, their concerns with popular culture. So we had mass culture theory, which we took a look at before, and the idea there was people were destroying elite and folk culture with base interests. So mass culture put a certain amount of the responsibility onto the individuals and talked about them as people with baser interests. That is, lower class or lower valued interests. But with critical theory in the Frankfurt School, they started to look at culture industry, and they saw that industry was destroying culture and individuals through its practices, or the culture industry, an industry that produces certain types of culture. So if we think about that today, well, that could be the music industry. That's a culture industry. The publishing industry is a culture industry. So that's what we mean when we talk about culture industry, tourism industry, right? These kind of things. So the Frankfurt School, in its ideas and critiques of culture industry, relies on these ideas from Marxism. And we'll look at a few things here. We're going to look at Marxism later in the course, but here's where it pulls from Marxism. It talks about commodity fetishism, and this is when when the price becomes the important thing. And we've had these conversations before with our friends and stuff when we say, "Look at all this great crap I got for $5." It doesn't matter whether you'll ever use that, right? I know many people have bought in clothes on great deals that they never wear. And so when we're talking about commodity fetishism in when the Frankfurt School is, that it's getting to that point when the price is the important thing. And also in that we're getting this idea of exchange value, right? The exchange value is not the real value. The exchange value comes to define how we think of things and relate to things in relationships. So what this means is we think about, when we pay for something, not necessarily what its real value is, what was the work, effort, and whatnot that went into that, but how it relates to other things. Fast food is a good example. In some ways, which should be the real value of all the work and effort that's put into making that meal for you is seen as irrelevant, and it's really about kind of what you're paying for it versus what you're actually getting out of it, which is nutrient. Granted, we don't think of fast food as nutritious, but we do think about, or we don't have any real conversation about the real value of food. Particularly if we look at something like, McDonald's and calories, which are important for human existence. How many calories we get. We don't have that discussion of what's the relationship between what we're paying and how many calories or how much nutrition we're getting out of it. So all this is summed up, that idea of, can you believe I only paid 1 cent for all this crap? That's, one of the critiques, or that's one of the concerns from Marxism, is that obsession with commodity fetishism. Engagement rings are actually a really good example of commodity fetishism, in which the discussion around that is exactly how much did you pay for it, and there's an expectation that regardless you should pay at least 2 months of your salary in order to acquire it. The exchange values of something like engagement rings is questionable because you're exchanging what you think it should be worth versus what its real value is. I mean, if we think about it, a ring, what is its real value? Not what we expect or want it to represent, but what is its real value? In lots of cases, it's not nearly as much. All right, so Frankfurt School approaches modern capitalism in this it kind of has these views of modern capitalism. Capitalism has overcome the challenges of economy, and that's in particular class challenges. That despite one of the core tenets of Marxism is that there will be class tensions, the lower classes and middle classes will override or overtake the upper classes and kind of level the playing field in a very, very extreme way. But capitalism overcomes the challenges of that, and it does so because it becomes stable and continuous. Um, there is no there's less extremes in capitalism, or at least through this viewpoint, and when doing so, and because of that, it also or when doing that, it also superficially includes the working class. That is, it does try to provide some stability, it does try to provide some regular means of employment and resources for the working class. That's not necessarily useful in improving their conditions or saving them from, the larger range of things that impact the poor and lower classes, but there still appears to be more stability and continuity. And when that happens, what we see, in the result of that is that the different classes find means of reinforcing reinforcing capitalism's existence. That is, they reinvest in it, or there is a continual reinforcement of capitalism through different practices. And this is what, like I said, this represents that failure of Marxism, is that capitalism provides for that stability, or at least on appearances, the stability and continuity of existence, and by doing so, they end up encouraging both middle and working class to reinvest in or continue to be a part of capitalism. So how does this happen? First, it develops a range of false needs for the masses, right? And I think this is important because we do this all the time in our own lives. We see things that we have decided we need. We either need them because it's important to our families, to our to our families, to our work, to our day-to-day life. Even though we don't necessarily need them, we feel this false need, or there's supposedly this false need for a lot of different things, right? Think about a car. Think how many of us needed a car. Of course, there were other ways in which we could negotiate our lives, but we needed a car, and that was going to be that would be it. We couldn't do a bike, or we decided to disregard bikes or disregard other forms of transportation. And this false need serves as a distraction from true or real needs, right? So we're fixated on a car, and that distracts us from what might be our more important to our overall lifelong existence, happiness, pleasure. And we're able to meet those false needs, and even when those false needs are met, all of a sudden the culture industry produces new forms of false needs. We go from pager to cell phone to smartphone. Apple is really a really good example of this, in which, of course, they put out a product, and then, a year later, here comes that new product, and you really do need that new product. The old product isn't as good. Here we are 4 or 5 years out, and we're already on version 4 of the iPad. We've seen numerous renderings of iPods over the decade, and we've seen numerous renderings of the iPhone. Right, and each time that comes out, there's this pitch, there's this frenzy within culture, and you see it on television and the news. People spend a lot of time telling the masses that no, you really need to have this. And so spending money on a cell phone you don't even need, distracts you from, acquiring things that you might really need, or that are important to your overall happiness and long-term existence. And so within this, people buy happiness, or believe that they can buy some things, that because they can buy some things like iPhones, they believe their needs are being met, right? So this creates a certain amount of, there's that self-investment because they're contributing to that capitalist society, and then their needs are being met, and therefore they don't feel as resistant. They don't feel as there isn't as much tension between the classes or among the classes. And so consumption of false needs further enslaves them into capitalism, right? The more we buy, the more we're invested, especially when we introduce things like credit, and we end up with people, owing lots and lots of credit card debt, and therefore really tied to capitalism, because all they can do at that point is keep working to pay off those debts. And then the true needs cannot be met through, the argument within the Frankfurt School is that true needs cannot be met through modern capitalism, that you have to apply, you have to go about it through other means. You cannot buy your way to meeting your true needs. So these are the ideas of the Frankfurt School. That's not to say they're true, but there are interesting ways in which you can see them show up in our culture. We can see that, through the Frankfurt School, popular culture is here to enslave you, and that this continual push around consumerism, and we'll come back to this in the last module of the course when we look at questions around conspicuous consumption and ethical consumption, but there is this drive, of course, to keep buying even when you don't need to. And I think that's, if there's something to take from the Frankfurt School, I think that's an important piece, is that we are driven to buy. We have spending holidays like Black Friday, and we have all these ideas around, well, a holiday's coming up, so you must spend, spend, spend. This is coming up, so you must buy. There's this very strong push for us to be parted with our money, or for us to even go into debt, just so that we can have our quote-unquote needs met. So the cultural industry, or the culture industry. So what's going on here? We can, from the Frankfurt School point of view, the culture industry continually produces new things, and we call this, or this is referred to, that power of purchase. That they have the ability to create these new objects that push for consumption. And again, those new things distract us from real-world change. That is, it gives us the sense of simulated life. If you are so focused on the new iPod or the new iPhone, you're not taking the time, or you're being distracted from what's actually going on in the world, which is maybe starvation, maybe anything going on. The politics currently that are creating challenges for everybody. The power of purchase. You could look at something like diamond rings or engagement rings, and there you see this question around, oh, there's always these new styles and new approaches, and if we're fixated on, buying a diamond ring, buying an engagement ring, that all of a sudden distracts us from the real world change, which is, if that engagement ring is diamond, and is that diamond part of, the blood diamond dynamics of Africa, in which people are literally enslaved and worked to death in order to get those diamonds. You don't raise those questions. You're too busy focused on, I need the right ring, to ask or to raise challenges or questions about where that ring actually comes from. And in the purchasing of, or the seeking out of these new things, it socially cements people to their world, right? It reinforces the world in which they're in. So if you buy a car, you have to pay for that car, and you have to focus on maintaining that car, and have to do things like get registration, and have to obey new laws, around speeding, have to have your license. And then you have to use that car, or you use that car to move about and also have conversations, right? Every time somebody gets a new car, they have conversations around it. They talk about it. They show it off. And so that too connects you to the world as a person that owns this car, as opposed to a person that's looking to address major issues in the world. And so here's a really good quote from Dominic Strinati's Introduction to Theories of Popular Culture. Popular culture does not necessarily hide reality from people, nor are they directly duped or tricked by it. Rather, they are led to recognize how difficult it is to change the world and to value the respite popular culture offers. So here's that idea of, they're not, culture industry doesn't necessarily say they're people are complete dupes, but it feels like a break to go into these areas of popular culture. At least that's what culture industry would say, is that these offer places to either hide or to take a relief from, um, or to just to break away from, because the larger world is that much more difficult, and the culture industry provides this place where they don't have to think about it. So that industry process, it works in two ways. We first have standardization. That is, you create a product that's universalized. So in this case, an example could be cars. Another example could be, music players with the iPod, or tablet devices with the iPad. And you create that standardization, you get everybody interested in it, and then you follow it up with pseudo individualization. That is superficial differences, shades of the same, inundation of choice, right? So pseudo individualization, what we would see there is, for instance, with an iPad, you can have an iPad in several different colors. You can have your name engraved on the iPad. You can get different covers for the iPad. Or inundation of choice, the cereal aisle is a great example of that, right? You ever go down to the cereal aisle? That is the craziest place in the store, because you have like 100 plus. I would love for somebody to count how many different types of cereals are offered um, in their particular grocery store, because I would bet it's at least 100, if not more, right? If you go into a grocery store, I think on average the grocery store has upwards of, I want to say it's over 50,000 different products. In fact, I think Trader Joe's is famous for, not allowing for more than 10,000 products. 10,000 products, different types of products in one store, right? So there's a certain, when we look at the grocery store, it's 10,000, or it's 50,000 of the same things, right? Like 5,000 types of chips, or 5,000 different types of cereal, or 5,000 types of milk. So that's the culture, or Frankfurt School would say that's the industry process, right? We have the standardization, everybody drinks milk now, and then the pseudo individualization. You can have 3%, you can have 2%, you can have whole milk, you can have skim milk, you can have chocolate milk. Um, so that's what we start to see, or that's how they would explain the industry process. All right, that's all for now for this mini lecture, and I will see you in part 2. Thank you very much.